Is that you, Night Fury?
Man. Is that you, Night Fury? The F-22 pilot's voice shattered 7 years of silence. In seat 23C, the woman everyone ignored froze, her hands gripping the armrests as United Flight 2847 systems failed one by one. She'd spent 7 years hiding from that legendary call sign. But now, with 289 passengers falling towards certain death, her secret was exposed. And only she could save them. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The cabin lights of United Airlines Flight 2847 cast their sterile glow across rows of passengers settling into that peculiar limbo of commercial flight, 289 souls suspended between departure and destination, each absorbed in their own small universes of laptops, books, and streaming entertainment. The Boeing 777-300ER had departed San Francisco International at 14:35 Pacific Time, bound for Washington Dulles with an estimated flight time of 4 hours and 42 minutes. In seat 23C, wedged between a businessman reviewing spreadsheets and a college student with headphones, sits a woman who has spent 7 years perfecting the art of being invisible. Her name is Elena Reeves. At least, that's what her driver's license says, what her apartment lease reads, what the coffee shop barista writes on her morning order. Elena Reeves, data analyst for a mid-tier consulting firm in Denver. Elena Reeves, who wears sensible business casual clothing from department stores, who carries a laptop bag with optimistic motivational quotes, who makes polite small talk about weather and traffic without ever saying anything memorable. Elena Reeves, who is so thoroughly unremarkable that flight attendants pass her row without a second glance, who blends into every crowd as naturally as water finding its level. But Elena Reeves didn't exist 7 years ago. 7 years ago, there was only Captain Alexandra Night Fury Chen, and that name made colonels straighten their spines, made veteran pilots shake their heads in reverent disbelief, made Pentagon briefing rooms fall silent when her mission reports were declassified enough to discuss. 7 years ago, that call sign represented something beyond normal military excellence. It represented the pilot who flew missions that existed in the darkest margins of Air Force operations, who pioneered tactical aviation procedures that redefined what combat pilots thought possible, who became simultaneously the most decorated and most traumatized aviator in recent military history. 7 years ago, she walked away from all of it. Elena, because she must think of herself as Elena now, because Alexandra belongs to someone she can no longer afford to be, stares at the seatback screen without seeing it, her hands folded in her lap with practiced neutrality. She's mastered this posture over 7 years of deliberate anonymity, shoulders slightly rounded to appear non-threatening, expression pleasantly blank, body language radiating the kind of middle management exhaustion that makes people's eyes slide past without engaging. She's become a ghost in plain sight, camouflaged not by darkness but by aggressive ordinariness. The businessman beside her glances over. Heading home or traveling for work? The question requires response, silence draws attention, and attention is what she spent 7 years avoiding. Work, she answers, her voice carrying that flat corporate drone she's cultivated. Quarterly audit meeting. You know how it is. He nods sympathetically, already losing interest, and returns to his spreadsheet. Perfect. The exchange was forgettable enough to fade from memory before they land, generic enough that he couldn't describe her to security if asked, empty enough that it reveals absolutely nothing about who she really is or what she spent 7 years running from. Because Night Fury isn't just a call sign she abandoned. It's an identity that nearly destroyed her. The memories come despite her best efforts to suppress them, they always do during flights, when the physical sensation of being airborne triggers associations she's tried for 7 years to sever. Night operations over hostile territory where her F-22's stealth capabilities made her the only pilot who could reach targets conventional forces couldn't touch. Missions where she pushed beyond established tactical boundaries because the intelligence was time-critical and the targets were too valuable and the risk calculations said impossible but her capabilities said maybe, just maybe, if she flew with precision that exceeded human limitations and accepted dangers that made mission planners physically ill to contemplate. She became Night Fury, because she flew when others couldn't, struck when darkness provided cover, executed missions that existed in classified files too sensitive for most personnel to access. Her combat record read like fiction: 17 high-value target eliminations in contested airspace, 43 close air support missions where her precision weapons delivery saved ground units from certain annihilation, and the legendary Operation Ghostwing where she single-handedly disabled an entire enemy air defense network in conditions that 3 separate mission reviews had deemed unsurvivable. But what the citations and commendations never mentioned, what the glowing fitness reports carefully omitted, what even the classified after-action reviews couldn't fully capture, was the cost. Every mission where she saved hundreds meant flying through fire that should have killed her. Every impossible tactical achievement required pushing her aircraft and herself beyond safe operational limits. Every night she returned from missions that shouldn't have been survivable, other pilots didn't return from operations that seemed routine by comparison. The guilt started small, just the normal survivor's burden that every combat pilot carries, the uncomfortable awareness that luck and skill can't always be distinguished, that being good sometimes just means being alive while others aren't. But Night Fury's missions weren't normal and her survival rate wasn't normal, and eventually the psychological weight of being the pilot who could do the impossible became indistinguishable from being the pilot who watched others die attempting the merely difficult. Lieutenant Morrison, who flew her wing during a close air support mission and took the surface-to-air missile that should have targeted her lead position. Captain Davis, who provided tactical cover during a strike operation and ran out of fuel 3 minutes short of the tanker rendezvous because he'd burned extra helping her escape an ambush. Major Richards, her squadron mate and closest friend, who died when his F-22 suffered mechanical failure returning from a mission where Night Fury had once again defied probability and death to accomplish objectives that mission planners privately admitted were probably suicide assignments. They gave her the Distinguished Flying Cross. They gave her the Air Medal with Valor device. They promoted her ahead of her peer group and assigned her to Training Command where her tactical genius could shape the next generation of fighter pilots. They called her a legend, a tactical innovator, the pilot whose capabilities redefined what the Air Force thought achievable. And every night she woke up seeing Morrison's aircraft exploding in her peripheral vision, hearing Davis's final radio transmission as his fuel gauges hit zero over hostile territory, remembering Richards's wife at the memorial service looking at her with eyes that asked the question everyone was too polite to voice: why do you keep surviving when better pilots keep dying? The breaking point came during a routine training flight, 23 months into her assignment at Nellis Air Force Base, where she was teaching advanced tactical aviation to pilots who looked at her with reverent awe that made her skin crawl. She was demonstrating an aggressive defensive maneuver, one she'd pioneered during actual combat operations, when suddenly she was back over Syria, back in that mission where Morrison died, back in the moment where she'd executed that exact maneuver and lived while her wingman died covering her escape. She landed the aircraft on autopilot because her hands were shaking too badly to trust manual control. She filed the post-flight paperwork in a daze. She drove home, sat in her kitchen, and understood with crystal clarity that Captain Alexandra Night Fury Chen could no longer exist because the weight of that identity was killing her more surely than any enemy fire ever had. Retirement paperwork took 6 months to process. The Air Force didn't want to lose her, tried to convince her to take medical leave or accept a desk assignment or consider any alternative to permanently separating from service. But she was adamant with a quiet desperation that eventually convinced her chain of command that Night Fury was done flying, done teaching, done being the legend whose tactical brilliance came packaged with survivor's guilt that had metastasized into something approaching post-traumatic stress disorder. She separated from the Air Force with full honors, impeccable service record, and recommendations that would have guaranteed her any number of high-paying defense contractor positions or commercial pilot roles with airlines that would have been thrilled to employ someone with her capabilities. Instead, she moved to Denver, enrolled in night classes for data analytics, created identity documents for Elena Reeves through legal name change that buried Alexandra Chen under paperwork, and spent 7 years building a life so thoroughly ordinary that no one would ever connect her to Night Fury. 7 years of working in corporate offices where no one discussed military service. 7 years of avoiding airports when possible and white-knuckling through necessary flights while pretending the sensation of being airborne didn't trigger memories of combat operations. 7 years of maintaining acquaintances but never friendships close enough to require explaining her past. 7 years of being forgettable, unremarkable, invisible, and safe from the identity that nearly destroyed her. The flight attendant stops beside her row. "Can I get you anything to drink?" "Water, please," Elena responds with the bland smile she's perfected, the one that communicates basic politeness while discouraging further conversation. The attendant nods, serves the businessman's coffee, hands Elena her water, and moves on without the slightest indication that she's just served someone who once coordinated tactical aviation operations that made Joint Chiefs of Staff lean forward in their briefing room chairs. Perfect. Exactly as Elena has engineered for 7 years. No recognition, no curiosity, no indication that she's anything other than what she appears, a mid-level corporate employee on a routine business flight, as ordinary as the recycled air and the muted engine hum. United 2847 has been cruising at 38,000 feet for 90 minutes when the first indication of trouble emerges as nothing more than a brief crackle over the cabin speakers, a momentary interruption in the soft jazz playing between announcements. Most passengers don't even notice. Elena notices. 7 years of civilian life haven't completely erased the combat pilot's reflexive attention to anything unusual in aircraft operations, but she deliberately forces herself not to care, not to analyze, not to fall back into tactical assessment mode that belongs to someone she's no longer willing to be. The captain's voice comes over the intercom, professionally calm with the practiced reassurance that airline pilots master during training. "Folks, this is Captain Mitchell from the flight deck. We're experiencing some minor technical difficulties with our navigation systems. Nothing to be concerned about, but we're going to be adjusting our altitude and route slightly while we troubleshoot. Flight attendants, please return to your seats for now." Elena's hands tighten fractionally on her armrests, an involuntary response she immediately suppresses. Minor technical difficulties with navigation systems on a commercial 777 should indeed be nothing to be concerned about given the multiple redundant systems Boeing engineers built into these aircraft. But something about the captain's tone, some subtle stress marker beneath the professional calm that only someone with thousands of hours of high-stakes flight experience would recognize, suggests the situation might be more significant than the announcement implies. She forces herself to relax, to maintain the Elena Reeves posture of mild concern appropriate for a nervous civilian passenger rather than the tactical assessment mode that Night Fury would instinctively deploy. This isn't her problem. She's not a pilot anymore, not responsible for aircraft operations, not the person who needs to worry about navigation system failures. She's a passenger, nothing more, and passengers trust flight crews to handle technical difficulties while they remain safely uninvolved in their seats. The businessman beside her glances up from his spreadsheet, frowning slightly. "You fly a lot. Is this normal?" "I'm sure it's fine," Elena responds with the casual dismissiveness of someone who doesn't actually know anything about aviation systems, who hasn't spent thousands of hours studying failure modes and emergency procedures, who couldn't describe exactly which navigation redundancies should prevent minor difficulties from becoming major emergencies. They have backup systems for everything. He nods, reassured by her apparent lack of concern, and returns to his work. Elena stares at her seatback screen and fights against every instinct screaming at her to analyze what minor technical difficulties with navigation systems might actually mean, what failure modes could affect multiple redundant systems simultaneously, what external factors might cause navigation problems that require altitude and route adjustments. Because that analysis belongs to Night Fury, and Night Fury doesn't exist anymore. 10 minutes pass. The cabin maintains its normal cruise atmosphere, passengers reading, sleeping, watching entertainment, existing in that suspended animation of long-haul flight where time becomes elastic and irrelevant. Elena focuses on her breathing, on maintaining the carefully constructed Elena Reeves persona, on not allowing her mind to drift toward tactical aviation analysis that has no place in her current identity. Then the aircraft shudders. It's subtle, just a brief vibration that might be ordinary turbulence, except Elena's muscle memory recognizes it isn't, because turbulence produces different sensations than what she just felt, because whatever caused that shudder involved the aircraft itself rather than external atmospheric conditions. Several passengers glance up nervously. The businessman's coffee sloshes slightly in its cup. Elena keeps her expression carefully neutral while her combat pilot's brain catalogues the sensation against thousands of hours of flight experience and reaches conclusions she desperately doesn't want to consider. The captain's voice returns, and this time the professional calm sounds noticeably strained. Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some additional technical issues that require our attention. I'm going to need everyone to return to your seats immediately, fasten your seatbelts, and secure any loose items. Flight attendants, prepare the cabin for potential emergency procedures. The cabin atmosphere transforms instantly from casual boredom to sharp anxiety. Passengers sit up straighter, conversations halt mid-sentence, parents reach for their children with sudden protective urgency. The flight attendants move through the aisles with practiced efficiency that can't quite hide their own tension, checking seatbelts, securing overhead bins, maintaining reassuring smiles that don't reach their eyes. Elena feels her heart rate accelerate despite her best efforts at control. Emergency procedures. Not minor technical difficulties anymore, but something serious enough that the flight crew is preparing passengers for potential emergency protocols. Her hands grip the armrests hard enough that her knuckles widen, and she forces herself to breathe slowly, evenly, to maintain the frightened civilian passenger persona rather than shifting into the tactical assessment mode that 7 years of deliberate suppression hasn't completely eliminated. This isn't her emergency. She's not responsible. She's just a passenger who needs to trust the flight crew to handle whatever situation is developing. She's Elena Reeves, data analyst, who knows nothing about aviation emergencies and shouldn't be analyzing the situation with combat pilot expertise she's spent 7 years pretending not to possess. The aircraft shudders again, more pronounced this time, accompanied by a sound that Elena's trained ear recognizes as something wrong with the hydraulic systems, not catastrophic failure but definitely degraded performance, definitely something that shouldn't be happening to a properly maintained Boeing 777 cruising at altitude. Around her, passengers gasp and grip their armrests. A child starts crying several rows forward. The businessman beside her has gone pale, his spreadsheet forgotten as he stares at the seat back in front of him with dawning fear. What's happening? He asks Elena, as if she might have answers, as if her calm demeanor suggests expertise rather than just 7 years of practice hiding her reactions. I don't know, she lies, because Elena Reeves doesn't know, because Elena Reeves is just another frightened passenger, because admitting that she recognizes the specific sound patterns of hydraulic system degradation would require explaining expertise she can't afford to reveal. I'm sure they'll figure it out. But even as she speaks, her combat pilot's mind is running calculations she can't suppress. Hydraulic system problems combined with navigation difficulties suggest either catastrophic coincidence or coordinated failure modes that shouldn't occur naturally. And if it's not coincidence then something is actively wrong with this aircraft beyond normal mechanical failure. And if something is actively wrong then the emergency might exceed what commercial flight crews are trained to handle, and if it exceeds their training then 289 passengers are in danger from a situation that requires expertise they don't have. Expertise that Elena has spent 7 years refusing to use. The captain's voice returns, and this time the professional calm has been completely replaced by barely controlled urgency. This is Captain Mitchell. We are declaring an emergency. I need everyone to listen carefully to the flight attendant's instructions. We have experienced multiple system failures and are coordinating with air traffic control for emergency landing procedures. Please remain calm and follow all crew instructions immediately. The cabin erupts into barely controlled panic. Passengers cry out in fear, parents clutch their children, people grab phones to send desperate final messages to loved ones. The flight attendants move through the aisles attempting to maintain order while their own faces betray the terror they're fighting to suppress. Elena sits frozen in her seat, her carefully maintained civilian persona cracking under the weight of understanding exactly how serious multiple system failures are, how limited commercial crew training is for managing cascading emergencies, how desperately these 289 people need help that the current flight crew might not be able to provide. But providing that help means revealing herself. Means stepping forward as someone with expertise that Elena Reeves shouldn't possess. Means destroying 7 years of carefully constructed anonymity to become Night Fury again, even temporarily, even though reclaiming that identity might crack open psychological wounds she spent 7 years trying to heal. She sits paralyzed by competing imperatives, the duty that defined her entire military career demanding she help, the self-preservation instinct that drove her retirement screaming at her to stay hidden, the weight of 289 lives against the weight of her own psychological survival. Her hands shake where they grip the armrests. Her breath comes short and sharp. Around her, passengers spiral toward full panic while she remains frozen between the person she is and the person she used to be. The aircraft drops suddenly, not catastrophic failure but definitely loss of altitude control, definitely situation degrading beyond normal emergency parameters. Oxygen masks deploy from overhead compartments, dangling on their tubes like accusatory fingers pointing at her paralysis. The automated voice instructs passengers to secure their own masks before helping others, and Elena's hands move on autopilot through procedures she's practiced thousands of times, muscle memory operating independently of her conscious paralysis. She secures her mask and helps the businessman fumble his into place, her hands steady despite her internal crisis, her movements reflecting training that 7 years of civilian life haven't erased. Around her, passengers struggle with their masks, flight attendants move through the cabin assisting people, and the situation continues deteriorating toward catastrophic while Elena sits frozen between her civilian identity and the combat pilot who might be able to help. That's when the radio transmission cuts through the cabin speakers, must be patched through from the cockpit, must be serious enough that the captain wants passengers to hear military coordination. A voice comes through with the clipped professional tone of fighter pilot communications, United 2847, this is Raptor 11 of the 27th Fighter Squadron, United States Air Force. We have been scrambled to provide tactical support for your emergency. Please transmit your full situation report and we will coordinate assistance. F-22 Raptors. The 27th Fighter Squadron. Elena's hand stops shaking as something cold and sharp settles in her chest, because she knows that squadron, because she trained pilots in that squadron during her final assignment at Nellis, because those pilots learned tactical aviation from Night Fury, and now they're here providing escort for a commercial emergency that requires expertise those pilots possess because she taught them. The captain's voice responds, stressed and desperate. Raptor 11, United 2847. We have multiple cascading system failures, navigation, hydraulics, and now flight control degradation. We're losing altitude control and our emergency procedures are not containing the failures. We have 289 souls on board and we need immediate assistance with emergency landing coordination. United 2847, copy all. We are coordinating with Edwards Air Force Base for emergency landing clearance. Stand by for. The pilot's voice cuts off abruptly, replaced by silence that stretches for several seconds before he returns, his professional tone now carrying an edge of shocked disbelief. United 2847, we have established video link with your cabin cameras for tactical assessment. I need to confirm something. Is there a passenger aboard your flight, female, approximately 5'6", sitting in seat 23C? Elena's heart stops. Her breath catches in her throat. Around her, passengers look confused by the oddly specific question, but Elena understands with sick certainty what's happening. The F-22 pilot is looking at cabin camera feeds, seeing her face despite her 7 years of anonymity, recognizing features that training photos burned into his memory because Night Fury was the instructor pilot whose tactical brilliance shaped his entire approach to combat aviation. She closes her eyes, her 7 years of careful invisibility crumbling in real time, her civilian identity dissolving because someone recognized her despite all her efforts to remain hidden. This is what she's feared for 7 years, not general discovery, but specific recognition by someone who knew her, by someone who would remember Night Fury and connect that legendary call sign to the ordinary woman desperately trying to hide. The captain's voice comes back, confused and uncertain. Raptor 11, affirmative, we have a female passenger in seat 23C. Why is this relevant to our emergency? The F-22 pilot's voice returns, and now it carries unmistakable recognition mixed with profound shock and desperate hope. His next words shatter 7 years of anonymity with surgical precision. "Ma'am. Is that you, Night Fury?" The cabin falls into absolute silence. Every passenger who can hear the transmission freezes, the panic momentarily suspended by sheer confusion about what they just heard. Flight attendants stop mid-motion, staring at the speakers in bewilderment. The captain's voice returns with pure confusion. "Raptor 11, please clarify. Who are you addressing?" But Elena can't hear any of it over the roaring in her ears, over the sound of her carefully constructed world collapsing, over 7 years of peace and anonymity shattering because someone said those 2 words, Night Fury, and connected them to her. She sits frozen in her seat, oxygen mask hanging forgotten from her face, hands gripping the armrest so hard her fingers have gone numb, while her civilian identity crumbles into dust and something she's tried desperately to bury forces itself back to the surface. The businessman beside her stares at her with dawning confusion. What did he just say? Night Fury? Is he talking to you? She can't respond. Can't move. Can't breathe. 7 years of running, 7 years of hiding, 7 years of being someone else, all destroyed by a combat pilot looking at a cabin camera feed and recognizing the instructor who taught him tactical aviation, recognizing the legend he trained under, recognizing Night Fury, despite all her efforts to make that identity disappear. The F-22 pilot continues, his voice now carrying unmistakable reverence and urgent desperation. "Ma'am, this is Captain James Rodriguez, call sign Viper 23. I flew under your command at Nellis Air Force Base, 27th Fighter Squadron, 2017 through 2018. You taught me advanced tactical aviation. Ma'am, I recognize you. I know that face. I know you've been away. But these people need you. They need Night Fury's expertise. Please, ma'am. We need you." Around Elena, passengers are beginning to understand that something extraordinary is happening, that military fighter pilots aren't just providing escort but are addressing someone aboard this aircraft with profound respect that suggests legendary status, that the quiet unremarkable woman in seat 23C might be someone whose identity carries weight beyond anything they imagined. They're turning to look at her, confusion transforming into curiosity, their panic momentarily displaced by the mystery of why F-22 pilots are begging someone named Night Fury to help. Elena opens her eyes slowly, feeling the crushing weight of inevitability settle over her, the terrible acceptance that she can no longer hide, that duty is demanding she reclaim the identity she's spent 7 years escaping, that 289 lives hang in the balance against her desperate need to keep Night Fury buried where it can't hurt her anymore. The captain's voice returns, now carrying dawning understanding and desperate hope. "Raptor 11, are you telling me I have a military pilot aboard my aircraft? Someone who can help us coordinate this emergency?" Rodriguez responds immediately. "Captain, if that's who I think it is, you have more than just a military pilot. You have one of the most accomplished tactical aviators in Air Force history. You have the pilot who pioneered half the crisis management procedures we use today. You have Night Fury, sir. And if she's willing to help, she can coordinate emergency management that will save everyone aboard your aircraft." The captain doesn't hesitate. His voice comes through the cabin speakers with the desperate authority of someone recognizing unexpected salvation. "Night Fury, this is Captain Mitchell. If you're aboard my aircraft, I am requesting your immediate assistance in the cockpit. We are beyond our training parameters and we need tactical expertise we don't possess. Please, ma'am. Help us." Elena unbuckles her seatbelt with hands that feel like they belong to someone else, with movements that come from muscle memory deeper than conscious thought, with the terrible resignation of someone accepting fate she spent 7 years trying to avoid. She stands slowly, and her entire demeanor transforms, the rounded shoulders straighten into military bearing, the blank expression sharpens into tactical focus, the forgettable civilian persona dissolves to reveal something harder and more dangerous beneath. The businessman beside her stumbles back, his eyes wide with shock at the transformation. Other passengers stare as she moves into the aisle, as this woman they've ignored for hours suddenly radiates command presence that makes it physically difficult to look away. Flight attendants freeze uncertainly, not sure whether to stop her or help her, confused by the sudden shift from panic management to whatever this situation has become. Elena, no, not Elena anymore, because Elena Reeves is crumbling away and what's left is something rawer and more damaged but infinitely more capable, moves toward the cockpit with the ground-eating stride of someone who has walked flight lines, who has commanded squadrons, who has coordinated operations where seconds meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Her 7 years of civilian invisibility are ending with every step, her carefully maintained anonymity dissolving because duty is demanding she become Night Fury one final time despite the psychological cost. A flight attendant moves to intercept her, professional training demanding she stop passengers from accessing the flight deck during emergencies. "Ma'am, I need you to return to your seat immediately." The woman who used to be Captain Alexandra Chen and spent 7 years being Elena Reeves and is now becoming Night Fury again despite every effort to prevent it, fixes the attendant with eyes that have seen combat operations that most people can't imagine and speaks with voice that carries authority that makes junior officers stand straighter. "The captain requested my assistance. I'm a former Air Force combat pilot. Step aside." The attendant steps aside. Not because of the words but because of something in the tone, something in the bearing, something that communicates on a level below conscious thought that this is not someone to obstruct when lives hang in the balance. Other passengers watch in stunned silence as this unremarkable woman they've ignored moves through the cabin with purpose that suggests everything they thought they knew about her was elaborate deception. She reaches the cockpit door and knocks with specific pattern, 3 sharp raps, pause, 2 raps. That hasn't been standard military protocol in years but which any Air Force pilot from her era would recognize as Tactical Aviation Identification Code. The door opens immediately, the first officer staring at her with confused hope, and she enters the flight deck without waiting for invitation. The cockpit is controlled chaos, Captain Mitchell wrestling with unresponsive flight controls, the first officer coordinating desperately with air traffic control, warning lights illuminating the panel like deadly Christmas decorations, and the situation spiraling toward catastrophic despite both pilots' best efforts. Mitchell glances back at her entrance, his face showing desperate hope mixed with uncertainty, because he's betting 289 lives on the possibility that military pilots are right about who she is. She moves to stand between the pilot seats, her eyes scanning the instrument panel with the instant comprehensive assessment that thousands of hours of flight time produces, her tactical mind processing failure modes and degraded systems and crisis parameters with the automatic efficiency that made Night Fury legendary. And despite 7 years away, despite her desperate efforts to suppress this expertise, despite the psychological wounds that forced her retirement, the analysis comes as naturally as breathing. "Captain Mitchell," she says, her voice carrying tactical calm that cuts through the cockpit chaos like lighthouse beam through fog. "I'm establishing communication with the F-22 formation. I need you to focus on maintaining what altitude control you still have while I coordinate crisis management with military support." Mitchell nods without questioning, because he's beyond the point where pride or protocol matter, because his aircraft is dying and someone just walked into his cockpit speaking with authority that suggests she knows exactly how to save it. He hands her a headset without hesitation, making room between the seats, accepting her presence with the desperate gratitude of someone recognizing unexpected expertise. She settles the headset over her ears, keys the transmit button, and speaks with voice that belongs to someone she hasn't been in 7 years, Raptor 1-1, "This is Night Fury. I copy your situation. Transmit full tactical picture and I'll coordinate crisis management from the flight deck." The response is immediate, Rodriguez's voice carrying barely controlled emotion mixed with profound relief. "Night Fury, Raptor 1-1. Ma'am, it's actually you. We thought. After you disappeared, we thought we'd never. Ma'am, it's an honor. Save the reunion, Captain." She cuts him off, not unkindly but with the tactical focus that allows no room for sentiment when lives hang in the balance. "Right now I need tactical assessment. What's your formation strength and what support can you provide?" Night Fury, for F-22's information, full tactical capability. We have Edwards Air Force Base cleared for emergency landing, ground support standing by, but the situation is beyond standard commercial emergency protocols. The 777 systems are cascading failure, navigation, hydraulics, flight controls all degraded beyond normal parameters. Ma'am, this doesn't look like mechanical failure. This looks like coordinated sabotage or external interference, she finishes, because she's already reached that conclusion from the pattern of failures, because cascading system degradation across multiple independent backups doesn't happen naturally, because her combat experience includes missions where enemies deployed electronic warfare systems designed to do exactly what's happening to United 2847. Any radar contacts suggesting hostile aircraft or electronic warfare assets in the area? Negative on radar contacts, ma'am. But we're detecting unusual electromagnetic interference patterns consistent with advanced jamming systems. Someone might be targeting this aircraft with ground-based or airborne EW capabilities we're not detecting on conventional radar. Captain Mitchell turns to stare at her, his face showing shock at the casual discussion of electronic warfare and hostile targeting that has nothing to do with mechanical failures and everything to do with deliberate attack. Are you saying someone is attacking my aircraft? That we're under some kind of military assault? She meets his eyes with calm that comes from flying missions where hostile fire was expected rather than emergency. Captain, focus on flying what's left of your aircraft. I'll handle the tactical situation. First officer, I need you to transmit passenger manifest to military command immediately. If this is deliberate targeting, there's a reason someone wants this specific flight disabled. The first officer moves to comply without questioning, because despite his confusion about who this woman is and why she's suddenly running operations from their flight deck, her competence is so evident that argument seems counterproductive when catastrophe is imminent. Mitchell returns to wrestling with degraded flight controls, his hands showing the strain of maintaining control over aircraft that wants to fall from the sky. She keys the radio back to the F-22 formation. Raptor 1-1, I need tactical assessment of electromagnetic interference. Can you localize the source? If someone is jamming this aircraft, they're operating within range to maintain signal lock. Rodriguez's response comes back immediately, his voice carrying the focused professionalism of someone who learned tactical thinking from her and is now applying those lessons under her direct command again. Night Fury, stand by for EW analysis. Raptor 2-2 is running electronic warfare sweep now. While she waits, she turns her attention to the flight systems, her eyes analyzing the cascading failures with expertise that Captain Mitchell doesn't possess, identifying patterns in the degradation that suggest attack vectors and vulnerabilities. The hydraulic systems are failing but not completely dead, suggesting electronic interference with control systems rather than physical damage. Navigation systems are receiving corrupted data, suggesting GPS jamming rather than equipment failure. Flight controls are degraded but responsive, suggesting command signal interference rather than mechanical breakdown. Everything points to sophisticated electronic warfare attack using equipment that shouldn't exist outside military applications, targeting a commercial flight that should have no tactical significance unless someone aboard this aircraft is significant enough to warrant this level of resource commitment. Which means someone on the passenger manifest is either target or threat important enough that hostile actors deployed military-grade EW systems to force this aircraft down. Captain Mitchell, she says with tactical calm that pretends they're discussing routine procedures rather than unprecedented attack on commercial aviation. I need you to maintain heading toward Edwards as long as possible. The jamming is likely designed to force us off course toward prepared capture or crash site. If we can reach Edwards Air Force Base, we have ground support that can counter electronic warfare. And if we can't maintain heading? Mitchell asks, his voice tight with stress of flying crippled aircraft. Then I coordinate emergency landing using tactical procedures that commercial aviation doesn't teach but which my previous career specialized in. Captain, I've landed damaged aircraft in contested airspace under fire from hostile forces. I can land your 777 with degraded systems if necessary. Mitchell's hands tighten on the controls, his face showing dawning understanding of exactly what kind of expertise just walked onto his flight deck, what kind of experience Night Fury represents, what it means that military fighters are treating her with reverence that suggests legendary status. "Who the hell are you?" he whispers. "Someone who retired 7 years ago," she answers quietly. "Someone who doesn't fly anymore because the cost of flying got too high. Someone who is extremely unhappy to be back in a cockpit coordinating combat operations. But someone who will save your passengers, Captain, because that's what I do." Rodriguez's voice returns, urgent and sharp. "Night Fury, we have EW source localized. Ground-based jamming system, approximately 40 miles northeast of your current position. Advanced Russian pattern equipment, military grade, definitely not civilian technology. Ma'am, someone deployed serious assets to bring this aircraft down. Can you suppress it?" she asks immediately, her tactical mind already running calculations about whether F-22s can eliminate ground-based jamming while maintaining escort of damaged commercial aircraft. "Negative, ma'am. The system is in populated area, civilian structures nearby. We cannot engage without risking collateral casualties. But we can coordinate with ground forces for." The aircraft shudders violently, accompanied by warnings screaming across the instrument panel as another system fails. The hydraulics finally give up completely, leaving Captain Mitchell with flight controls that respond sluggishly through backup electrical systems never designed to manage aircraft this size at cruise altitude. Around them, the cockpit fills with alarm tones that create symphony of impending disaster. "Night Fury," Rodriguez's voice carries barely controlled urgency. "United 2847's altitude is degrading rapidly. You need to execute emergency descent immediately before you lose what control authority you still have." She's already moving, her hands reaching for controls with muscle memory that 7 years hasn't erased, her voice snapping orders with tactical authority that makes both pilots respond automatically. "Captain Mitchell, initiate emergency descent. First Officer, coordinate with air traffic control for priority clearance. Raptor 11, I need tactical escort through descent profile and ground approach vectors for emergency landing. Night Fury, Raptor formation is with you. We'll provide tactical coordination and clear your approach corridor. Ma'am, whatever you're planning, we trust your expertise. Just like we did when you trained us." She feels something crack in her chest at those words, some fragment of the psychological armor she's built over 7 years splitting under the weight of being trusted again, being relied upon again, being Night Fury again despite all her efforts to bury that identity. But she can't afford to process that emotion now, can't afford to confront what it means that she's coordinating combat operations again, can't afford to acknowledge the terror that reclaiming this identity might cost her the psychological stability she's barely maintained. Beginning emergency descent, Mitchell announces, his voice steady despite the stress, his hands implementing procedures that represent controlled catastrophe, deliberately falling from the sky fast enough to reach lower altitude before systems fail completely but slow enough to avoid structural damage or passenger injury. The aircraft tilts forward, the nose dropping with stomach-lurching suddenness, and through the cockpit windows the ground begins rising toward them with threatening speed. She monitors the descent parameters, her tactical mind calculating angles and velocities and system degradation rates with the automatic precision that made her legendary, calling corrections to Mitchell when his inputs drift outside optimal parameters, coordinating with Rodriguez's F-22 formation as they maintain escort positions around the falling aircraft. The passengers must be terrified, experiencing rapid descent that feels like controlled crash, but right now her entire focus is on bringing this crippled aircraft down safely enough that landing becomes possible. Passing 20,000 feet, the first officer calls out, his voice professionally controlled despite the terror that must be screaming beneath his training. "Edwards. Air Force Base is 70 miles ahead, but at current descent rate will be below safe cruising altitude in 6 minutes. Night Fury, we have ground forces moving to suppress the jamming system," Rodriguez transmits. "But they need 12 minutes to reach position. Ma'am, can you keep that aircraft controllable for 12 more minutes?" She looks at the instrument panel, at the cascading warnings and degraded systems and backup controls that are operating beyond their design parameters, and runs calculations that tell her what she already knows. This aircraft has maybe 8 minutes of controlled flight left before systems degrade to the point where landing becomes crash and all 289 passengers become casualties. They won't make Edwards. They won't last until ground forces suppress the jamming. They have minutes, not the quarter hour that tactical situation requires. Negative, Raptor 1-1, she transmits with calm that pretends they're discussing routine procedures rather than imminent catastrophe. We don't have 12 minutes. We have 8 at most before flight control degradation reaches catastrophic. I need alternate landing options within 5 minutes of current position. Silence on the radio while Rodriguez and his formation process that timeline, while air traffic controllers scramble to identify landing options, while everyone involved in this emergency recognizes that the window for safe landing just collapsed to parameters that might be impossible. Captain Mitchell's face has gone pale, his hands gripping controls that grow more sluggish with every passing second, his entire career leading to this moment where his aircraft is dying and he's helpless to save it through conventional procedures. Night Fury, Rodriguez's voice returns, tight with stress. There's a regional airport 40 miles south of your position. Single runway, 8,000 feet, no emergency services beyond basic fire equipment. Ma'am, it's not rated for aircraft this size. Landing a 777 there is. Is what Night Fury specialized in, she finishes calmly. Captain Rodriguez, I've landed damaged F-22s on runways half that length with no emergency services and hostile fire incoming. I can land this commercial aircraft on 8,000 feet of concrete if the captain trusts me to coordinate the approach. Mitchell turns to look at her, his eyes showing naked fear mixed with desperate hope, because he's a commercial pilot with maybe 3,000 flight hours facing a situation that exceeds every simulation he's trained for, while this woman who appeared from nowhere speaks with casual confidence about landing aircraft in combat conditions that make his current emergency seem manageable by comparison. You can really do this? You can save my passengers? Captain, I once landed an F-22 with no hydraulics, degraded flight controls, and one engine on a highway in Syria while taking ground fire. Your 777 has better glide characteristics and more control authority than what I worked with that night. Yes, sir. I can save your passengers. But I need you to trust me completely and follow my instructions exactly. Mitchell nods without hesitation, because pride and authority and command structure mean nothing when catastrophe is imminent and someone offers expertise that might mean survival. The aircraft is yours, ma'am. Tell me what you need. She keys the radio back to the F-22 formation. Raptor 1-1, coordinate with air traffic control for emergency clearance to regional airport. I need approach vectors, wind conditions, and tactical assessment of runway environment. And Captain Rodriguez? I need you to remember everything I taught you about emergency landing coordination, because we're going to execute it exactly like the simulations we ran at Nellis. Copy that, ma'am, Rodriguez responds, and his voice carries the focused confidence of someone who trained under the best and is now applying those lessons under her direct command. Coordinating with ATC now. Raptor formation will maintain escort and provide tactical support throughout approach. Night Fury, we have your back. Just like you taught us. The next 6 minutes are compressed intensity beyond anything commercial aviation normally experiences, Captain Mitchell following her instructions with precision that shows excellent pilot despite his lack of tactical training, the first officer coordinating with ground services and air traffic control to clear their emergency approach, and her voice maintaining steady tactical calm that pretends they're executing routine procedures rather than attempting landing that pushes beyond design. Parameters of both aircraft and runway. She walks Mitchell through emergency procedures that don't exist in commercial aviation handbooks, techniques she developed during combat operations where survival meant innovation and conventional wisdom meant death. She has him configure the aircraft for maximum drag to burn off excess speed without losing control authority, coordinates with Rodriguez's F-22s to provide visual confirmation of landing gear deployment since their indicators might be corrupted by jamming, talks Mitchell through approach angle that's steeper than commercial standards but necessary given their abbreviated runway and degraded control response. United 2847, this is Regional Airport Tower, a new voice joins the radio traffic, younger and clearly terrified. We have emergency vehicles positioning. Ma'am, I need to inform you that our runway is not certified for aircraft your size. Landing loads might exceed. Tower, this is Night Fury coordinating emergency landing, she cuts in with tactical authority that permits no argument. Your runway will hold. I've seen concrete performance under worse conditions. Clear the approach corridor and have your emergency services ready for possible runway overrun, but we're landing on your runway regardless of certification. Acknowledge. Acknowledged, Night Fury, the tower operator responds, odd authority in her voice overriding his concerns. Runway is cleared, emergency services standing by. Ma'am, good luck. Luck is what civilians need, she responds. I have training. Captain Mitchell, we're beginning final approach. Follow my instructions exactly and ignore what feels wrong. Everything about this landing violates commercial standards, but commercial standards weren't designed for tactical crisis management. Trust the procedures. I trust you, Mitchell says simply, his hands on the controls responding to her guidance with the precision that suggests excellent pilot operating far beyond his normal parameters. Whatever you need. The regional airport rises through the windscreen, single ribbon of concrete stretching across scrubland terrain that looks impossibly short for aircraft this size, emergency vehicles clustered at the approach end like nervous spectators, and no margin for error because missing this runway means controlled crash in desert terrain at speeds that might not be survivable. She coordinates with Rodriguez's F-22 formation as they maintain escort positions, their pilots providing real-time tactical assessment that supplements the degraded instruments. She walks Mitchell through final approach configuration, has him dump additional speed through aggressive flare that commercial pilots would never attempt, coordinates touchdown point that gives them maximum rollout distance while still ensuring they contact runway rather than undershooting into rough terrain. 300 feet, Rodriguez calls, his F-22 maintaining parallel position with the descending 777. 200 feet. Approach looks good, Night Fury. You're centered on runway. 100 feet. 50 feet. Ma'am, this is going to work. You're actually going to pull this off. Touchdown now, she commands Mitchell, her voice carrying tactical precision that permits no hesitation. Main gear contact, hold the nose up, maximum aerodynamic braking until you feel main gear grip, then nose gear down and full braking authority. Do not try to make this gentle, we need maximum deceleration immediately. The Boeing 777 slams onto the runway with impact that rattles teeth and screams through the airframe, main landing gear absorbing forces they weren't designed for, tires smoking immediately as Mitchell implements full braking. The nose stays up for precious seconds while aerodynamic drag scrubs speed, then comes down hard onto nose gear that compresses nearly to its limits. Through the windscreen, the end of the runway approaches with terrifying speed. 8,000 feet sounds like reasonable distance until you're decelerating a 777 loaded with 289 souls and degraded systems. Brakes holding, Mitchell grunts through clenched teeth, his hands white-knuckled on the controls. Deceleration is good. Speed coming down. 4,000 feet of runway remaining. 3,000. We're going to make it. 2,000. 1,000. Ma'am, we're going to make it. The aircraft shudders to complete stop with maybe 200 feet of runway remaining, the brakes smoking like battlefield aftermath, the entire airframe groaning from the abuse, but completely, impossibly, miraculously stopped and intact with all 289 passengers alive. Emergency vehicles surround them immediately, fire crews spraying foam on overheated brakes, ground personnel positioning stairs against the fuselage, and through the cockpit windows she can see people on the ground staring up at the massive aircraft that just landed on their regional runway like combat operation. Captain Mitchell sits back in his seat, his hands shaking now that the crisis is past, his face showing shock and relief and profound gratitude. You saved us, he says quietly. You saved everyone. That landing was impossible. No commercial pilot could have done what you just did. No commercial pilot had to train for combat landing under fire, she responds, her voice carrying exhaustion that has nothing to do with physical effort and everything to do with psychological cost of being Night Fury again. Captain, you did excellent work. Your flying kept this aircraft controllable long enough for tactical procedures to work. Your passengers survived because you trusted expertise you didn't understand. The first officer turns to look at her, his face showing awe mixed with curiosity. Ma'am, who are you? I mean, I know they called you Night Fury, but what does that mean? What makes military pilots treat you like a legend, Mitchell finishes quietly. That's what Rodriguez said. You're not just a military pilot. You're someone whose expertise rewrote tactical aviation doctrine. Someone whose call sign is famous throughout the Air Force. He pauses, studying her face. Someone who disappeared 7 years ago and has been hiding as civilian passenger ever since. Why? She doesn't answer, because the explanation requires confronting trauma she's not ready to process, because admitting that Night Fury became psychologically unbearable means revealing wounds she's barely keeping bandaged. Instead, she removes the headset and turns toward the cockpit door. I need to check on the passengers. Make sure everyone is uninjured from the landing. But when she opens the cockpit door and steps into the cabin, she finds 289 passengers on their feet giving her thunderous standing ovation, their faces showing relief and gratitude and shocked awe that this unremarkable woman they ignored saved everyone through capabilities they couldn't have imagined. Flight attendants are crying with relief, parents are clutching their children with desperate thanksgiving, and every face shows the same question Mitchell just asked. Who is she and why was someone this skilled hiding as ordinary passenger? The businessman who sat beside her for hours pushes forward through the crowd, his face showing emotions too complex to name. You saved us all, he says simply. You were sitting right there next to me and I had no idea. I mean, when you said you worked in data analysis, I actually believed you were a boring corporate employee. You're actually some kind of legendary military pilot who lands aircraft like action movie character. Who are you really? She forces a smile that doesn't reach her eyes, maintaining the detachment that keeps her functional. I'm someone who used to fly. Someone who doesn't anymore. Someone who helped today because 289 lives required it, but who really wishes she hadn't been recognized. The cabin door opens as Rodriguez and his 3 wingmen board the aircraft, the F-22 pilots still in flight suits having landed immediately after the 777 touched down. Rodriguez approaches her with expression showing complex mix of respect, gratitude, and barely restrained emotion. He stops precisely 3 feet away and renders perfect military salute that speaks volumes about what Night Fury means to pilots who trained under her command. Ma'am, permission to speak, he says formally, his voice tight with emotion. She returns the salute automatically, muscle memory operating before conscious thought, and the gesture feels both natural and devastating, because she hasn't saluted in 7 years, because that simple movement connects her directly to military identity she's tried to escape, because responding to Rodriguez's salute means acknowledging that she's still Night Fury, regardless of how long she's hidden. Granted, Captain, she responds, falling into patterns of command that feel simultaneously foreign and familiar. Ma'am, when you disappeared 7 years ago, it devastated the entire tactical aviation community. You were the instructor who taught half the combat pilots currently flying F-22s. You pioneered crisis management procedures that have saved countless lives. You were. He pauses, searching for words. You were Night Fury, ma'am. The legend. And then suddenly you were gone, and nobody knew where or why. We thought maybe you died. Some pilots even held unofficial memorial services. And now you're here, and you just saved 289 lives using expertise we thought was lost forever. His voice cracks slightly. Ma'am, why did you leave? Why did you hide? She meets his eyes and sees genuine hurt beneath the respect, sees the bewilderment of someone who viewed her as tactical genius and can't comprehend why that genius would choose obscurity over continuing to serve and teach and fly. And she knows she owes him explanation but can't provide it, because explaining means admitting trauma that she's barely keeping contained, because telling Rodriguez why she left means confessing that Night Fury became identity she couldn't psychologically survive carrying. Captain Rodriguez, I left because I needed to, she says carefully, choosing words that reveal nothing while technically answering his question. I left because 7 years ago I reached point where I couldn't be Night Fury anymore. I left because sometimes extraordinary capabilities come packaged with extraordinary costs, and eventually those costs exceed what any person should be expected to bear. She pauses, meeting his eyes directly. I retired honorably. I earned that retirement through service that cost me more than medals and commendations measure. And I spent 7 years building civilian life where nobody expected me to be Night Fury, where I could exist as ordinary person rather than legend. But ma'am, you're not ordinary, Rodriguez protests, gesturing at the cabin full of grateful passengers. You're exceptional. You just proved that your capabilities are still intact. The Air Force needs you. We need you. Your tactical expertise, your teaching ability, your combat experience, these are irreplaceable assets that nearly destroyed me. She cuts him off, her voice harder than intended. Captain, I'm grateful that my training helped you today. I'm profoundly relieved that everyone aboard this aircraft survived. But I did not leave the Air Force lightly, and I did not spend 7 years hiding because I was bored or indecisive. I left because Night Fury was killing me. Because the psychological burden of being the pilot who could do the impossible became indistinguishable from being the pilot who survived while others died attempting the merely difficult. Because survivors' guilt and combat trauma and the weight of legendary status combined into something that left me unable to function as the person everyone expected me to be. The cabin has fallen silent around them, passengers listening to confession that explains what Night Fury really means, what legendary status really costs, why someone with her capabilities would choose anonymity over honor. Rodriguez's face shows dawning understanding mixed with horror, the recognition that his legendary instructor carried wounds that medals never healed. Ma'am, I didn't realize, he says quietly. I didn't understand that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I recognized you. I'm sorry that I destroyed your anonymity. I'm sorry that I forced you to be Night Fury again when you'd worked so hard to leave her behind. She manages a smile that might actually reach her eyes this time, some of the defensive armor cracking to allow genuine emotion through. Captain, you saved these people's lives by recognizing me. Yes, you destroyed 7 years of carefully maintained anonymity, and yes, I'm devastated about that. But you gave these passengers a chance at survival they wouldn't have had if I'd remained hidden. You made the tactically correct decision even though it came with personal cost to me. That's what I taught you to do. Be angry at the situation, not at yourself. Rodriguez nods slowly, his expression showing the complex processing of someone whose worldview just shifted. Ma'am, what happens now? With your identity exposed, with military databases now confirming Night Fury's location, with media inevitably discovering that legendary pilot just saved commercial flight. Ma'am, you can't hide anymore. Everyone is going to know who you are. She knows he's right. Knows that her 7 years of peace ended the moment he said, Night Fury, over open radio channels. Knows that military personnel will brief this incident up chain of command, that media will discover legendary pilot's return, that her civilian identity is permanently compromised now that 289 passengers and multiple F-22 pilots can testify that Elena Reeves is actually Captain Alexandra Chen, the infamous Night Fury, whose tactical genius and combat achievements made her simultaneously the most respected and most traumatized pilot in recent Air Force history. She can't hide anymore. Can't maintain the Elena Reeves identity now that Night Fury has been publicly revealed. Can't rebuild the anonymity that took 7 years to construct. Her peaceful civilian existence is over, destroyed by recognition she desperately wanted to avoid, shattered by duty that demanded she help regardless of personal cost. What happens now, she says quietly, is that I accept the consequences of being recognized. I deal with the inevitable media attention, the military inquiries, the public curiosity about where Night Fury has been for 7 years. I confront the identity I tried to escape and figure out whether I can reclaim some version of it that doesn't destroy me psychologically. She pauses, meeting Rodriguez's eyes. And I decide whether saving 289 lives today means I have moral obligation to return to service, to teach tactical aviation again, to be Night Fury for pilots who need the expertise I spent 7 years suppressing. Ma'am, you don't have to decide that right now, Rodriguez says gently. You don't have to commit to anything. You saved these people, and that's enough. That's more than enough. Whatever you decide about your future, you've already proven that Night Fury's capabilities were never lost, they were just dormant, waiting for the moment when duty demanded their return. She nods slowly, exhaustion settling over her like physical weight now that crisis adrenaline is fading. Around them, passengers begin disembarking through emergency doors, emergency personnel checking everyone for injuries, ground crews assessing aircraft damage, and media vehicles already approaching airport perimeter because word has spread that something extraordinary just happened at this regional airport. One of Rodriguez's wingmen approaches, a younger pilot whose face shows starstruck awe. Ma'am, I'm Lieutenant Sarah Chen. No relation, she adds quickly. I just wanted to say that I read your tactical aviation papers at the Air Force Academy. Your combat mission analyses are required reading for advanced flight training. You're the reason I applied for fighter pilot program. Meeting you is. She trails off, searching for words. Meeting you is like meeting living legend, ma'am. The woman who used to be Captain Alexandra Chen and spent 7 years being Elena Reeves and is now unwillingly becoming Night Fury again, looks at this young pilot whose career was shaped by tactical doctrine she developed, and feels something crack deeper in her chest, because this is what Night Fury really means, not just her own achievements but the legacy that influenced entire generation of pilots, not just her combat record but the training and teaching that multiplied her expertise. Across dozens of aviators who carry her lessons forward. And maybe, possibly, that legacy is worth more than her desperate need for anonymity. Maybe the psychological cost of being Night Fury is price she has to pay because the alternative, hiding that expertise and allowing it to die with her, means depriving future pilots of capabilities that might save their lives. Maybe her survivor's guilt and combat trauma and legendary status are burdens she has to carry because walking away completely means abandoning duty to pilots like Rodriguez and Lieutenant Chen who need what she can teach. Maybe she can't ever truly escape being Night Fury, because that identity isn't just about her, it's about everyone she trained, everyone who learned tactical aviation from her example, everyone whose survival depends on expertise that only she possesses. Lieutenant Chen, she says carefully, the papers you read were written by someone at the peak of her career, someone who hadn't yet confronted the full psychological cost of the operations they describe. They're accurate from tactical perspective, but they don't capture the human price of flying those missions. If you're going to build your career on my doctrine, I need you to understand that tactical brilliance isn't free. It costs in ways that medals don't measure. The young lieutenant nods seriously, her expression showing mature understanding beyond her years. Ma'am, I understand. My instructors made sure we knew that Night Fury didn't just disappear, she retired early because the psychological burden became unsustainable. They taught us your tactical expertise alongside warnings about combat trauma and the importance of recognizing when operational stress exceeds sustainable limits. Ma'am, you didn't just teach us how to fly, you taught us that even the best pilots have to acknowledge their human limitations. Something shifts in her chest at those words, some fragment of the guilt and shame she's carried beginning to crack. Because maybe retiring wasn't weakness. Maybe choosing her psychological survival over continued service wasn't abandoning duty. Maybe Night Fury taught important lessons through her retirement as well as through her combat achievements, lessons about recognizing trauma, about acknowledging limits, about understanding that legendary status doesn't make someone invulnerable to human frailty. Maybe she doesn't have to be ashamed of the 7 years she spent hiding. Maybe those 7 years were necessary healing time rather than cowardly escape. Maybe Elena Reeves wasn't elaborate deception but legitimate attempt at recovery, at building psychological foundation stable enough to eventually confront Night Fury again without the identity destroying her. And maybe, possibly, being recognized today, as devastating as it feels, might actually be opportunity rather than catastrophe. Opportunity to reclaim Night Fury on her own terms instead of the terms that broke her 7 years ago. Opportunity to teach tactical aviation again but with explicit acknowledgement of psychological costs. Opportunity to be the legendary pilot whose expertise saves lives while also being the traumatized veteran whose recovery journey teaches important lessons about combat stress and human limitations. She looks around the cabin at the passengers who survived because Night Fury returned for one emergency, at Rodriguez and his formation who flew escort using tactics she taught them, at Lieutenant Chen whose career was shaped by doctrine she developed. She sees the complex web of connections that Night Fury represents, not just her individual achievements but the multiplicative effect of expertise shared and lessons taught and tactical innovations that ripple forward through generations of pilots. And she understands, with clarity that feels simultaneously devastating and liberating, that she can't hide from this identity anymore. Can't pretend that Elena Reeves is sufficient existence when Night Fury represents capabilities and knowledge and experience that others desperately need. Can't maintain anonymity when recognition has already occurred and her presence here today will inevitably become public knowledge that destroys any remaining cover. Her 7 years of peace are over. But maybe that's acceptable if those 7 years provided healing that allows her to be Night Fury again without the psychological cost destroying her. Maybe she's stronger now than she was when she retired. Maybe civilian anonymity gave her perspective and distance that allows her to reclaim tactical aviation identity while maintaining psychological boundaries that protect her from the trauma that forced her retirement. Captain Rodriguez, she says quietly, I'm going to need time to process today's events and decide what comes next. But I want you to know that being recognized by someone I trained, being addressed as Night Fury by pilots who remember my teaching, being needed for expertise I thought I'd never use again, it's complicated. It's devastating and affirming and terrifying all at once. I spent 7 years convinced that walking away was necessary for my survival, and today it proved that maybe I was right to walk away when I did, but also proved that the expertise I tried to bury is still valuable and maybe still needed. Ma'am, whatever you decide, the tactical aviation community will respect it, Rodriguez responds. If you choose to return to teaching or consulting or any form of service, we would be honored to learn from you again. If you choose to maintain civilian life as much as possible despite today's exposure, we'll defend your privacy and acknowledge your right to retirement. Night Fury saved enough lives and taught enough pilots that nobody has right to demand more from you than you're willing to give. She nods, grateful for his understanding, grateful that recognition doesn't automatically mean pressure to return, grateful that maybe she has space to decide on her own terms what Night Fury means going forward. The passengers have mostly disembarked now, emergency personnel confirming that everyone survived without serious injury, and through the cabin windows she can see media vehicles gathering at airport perimeter with cameras and reporters who will want to know every detail about the legendary pilot who emerged from 7 years of hiding to save commercial flight. The attention she spent 7 years avoiding is about to become unavoidable. The anonymity she carefully constructed is permanently destroyed. The civilian identity she built is compromised beyond repair. Elena Reeves existed for 7 years, but she can't exist anymore now that Night Fury has been publicly revealed. But maybe that's not entirely tragic. Maybe reclaiming Night Fury, on her own terms, with psychological boundaries she's learned to maintain, with explicit acknowledgement of trauma and limitations, might be healthier than continuing to hide from identity that represents both her greatest achievements and deepest wounds. Maybe the path forward isn't choosing between Elena Reeves and Night Fury, but rather integrating both identities into someone who acknowledges tactical genius while also acknowledging human vulnerability. She walks toward the cabin door where emergency stairs wait to take her down to ground level where media and military personnel and grateful passengers will want to celebrate the legendary pilot who saved 289 lives. Her hands shake slightly as she grips the doorframe, her breath coming short and shallow, because stepping through this door means stepping back into public identity she's avoided for 7 years, means accepting that Night Fury is who she is whether she wants to be or not. Rodriguez appears beside her, his presence solid and reassuring. "Ma'am, I can run interference with media if you want. My formation can provide escort to keep reporters at distance. You don't have to face them alone." She manages a smile that actually reaches her eyes this time, grateful for the support, grateful for the reminder that maybe being Night Fury again doesn't mean being alone with the burden. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate that. But I think I need to face this directly rather than hiding behind military escort. I spent 7 years hiding, and maybe it's time to stop hiding and start acknowledging what Night Fury represents, the good and the bad, the achievements and the trauma, the legendary status and the psychological cost." She steps through the door and down the emergency stairs, her feet touching ground at this small regional airport where she just landed aircraft that shouldn't have fit on this runway using procedures that shouldn't have worked but did because Night Fury specialized in the impossible. Media cameras turn toward her immediately, reporters shouting questions, flash bulbs creating artificial lightning, and the entire scene feeling surreal, like watching someone else's life rather than living her own. But she straightens her spine with military bearing she hasn't used in 7 years, meets the cameras with direct gaze that acknowledges their attention, and accepts that this moment marks the end of Elena Reeves and the unwilling return of Captain Alexandra Night Fury Chen. Her 7 years of peace are over. Her carefully constructed anonymity is destroyed. Her civilian identity is permanently compromised. But 289 people are alive because she emerged from hiding. Rodriguez and his formation flew escort using tactics she taught them. Lieutenant Chen and countless other pilots built their careers on doctrine she developed. And maybe that legacy, painful and complicated as it is, means that Night Fury is identity worth reclaiming despite the psychological cost, because walking away completely would mean depriving others of expertise that saves lives. She doesn't know yet what comes next. Doesn't know if she'll return to teaching tactical aviation or maintain civilian career with acknowledged military background or find some hybrid path that honors both her expertise and her limitations. But she knows that as of today, she can't hide anymore. As of today, Night Fury is public knowledge. As of today, she has to confront the legendary identity she's spent 7 years escaping and decide whether she can carry it without the burden destroying her. The first reporter reaches her with microphone extended and question that launches thousand more. "Ma'am, is it true that you're the legendary Night Fury? That you've been in hiding for 7 years? That you just saved 289 lives using tactical expertise from your military career? Can you tell us where you've been and why you disappeared?" She takes a deep breath, steadies herself, and begins answering questions that will define her public identity going forward. No longer Elena Reeves the invisible data analyst, no longer Captain Alexandra Chen the traumatized retiree, but something new and undefined, the woman who was Night Fury, who walked away when the cost became too high, who returned when duty demanded it, and who now must figure out whether legendary status is curse or calling or complicated combination of both. Her 7 years of anonymity are over. But maybe, just maybe, they provided the healing she needed to face Night Fury again without the identity destroying her. Maybe hiding was necessary preparation for reclaiming. Maybe running was required before she could return. And maybe the pilot who said, "Ma'am, is that you, Night Fury," didn't just destroy her peace, maybe he gave her permission to stop hiding from who she really is and start building life that acknowledges both her extraordinary capabilities and her very human limitations. The story of Night Fury isn't over. It's just entering a new chapter, one she never wanted but might actually need. One she tried desperately to avoid but might ultimately survive. One she feared would destroy her but might actually heal the wounds that forced her into hiding 7 years ago. She faces the cameras, acknowledges the questions, and accepts that whatever comes next, Elena Reeves and Captain Alexandra Chen and Night Fury are all part of the same complicated identity that she can no longer separate or escape. And maybe that integration, painful as it is, represents the path forward that allows her to honor her past while building toward future that doesn't require hiding from who she is or what she's accomplished or what she's survived. Her 7 years of peace are over. But maybe something better is beginning, something honest, something integrated, something that acknowledges that legends are human and humans are fallible, and sometimes the bravest thing a legendary pilot can do is admit vulnerability while still offering the extraordinary capabilities that save lives. Night Fury has returned. Not because she wanted to. Not because she was ready. But because 289 lives needed her, and maybe that need is enough to justify reclaiming the identity she spent 7 years trying to escape. Maybe being Night Fury doesn't have to mean being destroyed by the legendary status. Maybe it can mean being human with extraordinary capabilities. Maybe it can mean being the pilot who saves lives while also being the veteran who acknowledges trauma. Maybe it can mean being legendary without pretending to be invulnerable. She doesn't know yet. But standing here on this runway, surrounded by grateful passengers and respectful military pilots and curious media representatives, she understands that she's going to find out. Whether she wants to or not. The legendary Night Fury has been found. And now she has to figure out what that means for the woman who spent 7 years insisting she no longer existed.